Okay, good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce our fourth keynote speaker for this conference, the coordinator of Mothernet, Dr. Eglė Kačkutė. Eglė is an associate professor in French and Francophone studies and migration studies at Vilnius University and head of the Department of French at Vilnius University. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of Eglė's academic background, she started her academic studies with a BA in English philology at Vilnius University. She gained master's degrees from Cambridge University and the Sorbonne before returning to Vilnius to complete her PhD in philology in 2011. Her PhD thesis, Identity in Contemporary British and French Women's Writing, was a finalist in a national competition for the Best PhD 2011 Awards of Lithuania. Eglė's interdisciplinary research interests include motherhood studies, migration studies, and 21st century women's writing. Her research has attracted funding from the Lithuanian Research Council, the Irish Research Council, and the European Commission, among others, and she has secured scholarships and fellowships from the Cambridge Overseas Trust, the French government, and UNESCO. And I think it's Eglė's research on the representations and experiences of migrant mothers in contemporary culture that has established her as an international leader in this field. And her work on migrant mothers' linguistic relationships with their children on the one hand, and migrant mothers' careers on the other, has gained international attention and has been published in prestigious academic journals as well as in book form. She's the author of the monograph, I want to try and get this right, Svatmos ir Savos, Strange and Familiar, Vilnius University Press 2012, and co-author with Marina Cavazza of the book Portrait of a Working Mother, Georg 2019. It has been a personal pleasure and a professional honor for me to work alongside Eglė since 2016 and especially since 2020 in her position as coordinator of the Mothernet project. I've been continually impressed by her passion for her research, her ability to relate her academic research to the lived experience of mothers, which I think is a really, really important facet of what we do, and her personal determination to draw attention to the voices of marginalized mothers. And I've been equally impressed by her leadership of the Mothernet over the past 3 years and her ability to take what was originally a diverse group of scholars from a wide variety of different disciplines, countries, generations, approaches, and attitudes, and build what I think we in the Mothernet all agree is now a thriving international and interdisciplinary network. The title of Eglė's talk today is Motherhood Studies in Europe, Present and Future. Eglė, I invite you to tell us more about this. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to go away and hide somewhere now. Thank you, Valerie. So, thank you very much all for being here today. You made it, we all made it to the mid-morning of the third day of the conference. Ice, snow, or high water. So well done all for being here, and we're still ticking. So, as the least established and the least senior of the four keynotes, I thought I'd go for the heaviest title ever. And I'm going to tell you everything and embarrass myself completely. Anyway, fear not. I will be very humble, and I will. What this means really is that I will situate my own research in the context of motherhood studies in Europe today, and I will actually speak from the perspective of the coordinator of the Mothernet project, as well as a member of the Motherhood project, as well as a motherhood scholar in my own right. So, there is a sort of positionality to this very obtuse title. So I will start with playing the national card. Marija Gimbutė, archaeologist, an immigrant and a mother of three, argued that female symbolism prevailing in Neolithic art, particularly the stone Venuses found all across Neolithic Europe, were actually a sign that Europe used to be non-patriarchal at some point, that there used to be a female-led, female-centered civilization and religion dominated by the cult of the goddess of the old Europe, where women assumed important social, religious, and political roles, and in which the maternal was considered to be an expression of universal humanity. I first saw that picture and learned about all this in this very room 30 years ago. It made a lasting impression. Fast forward 20 years, I'm a migrant mother in Switzerland, and I am sitting down, when I sat down for the first time to write my first post-PhD research proposal on migrant mothers, I'm sure that I was guided by the spirit of Marija Gimbutė, as well as protected and guided by the goddess of the old Europe. My aim today is to demonstrate that motherhood studies in Europe today are highly and deeply intersectional and interdisciplinary, and this is the main strength facilitated by the funding frameworks available for European scholars today. I will tell you about my research a little bit, about pre-MotherNet network, and then how the network and being in the network enabled my research to develop in an interdisciplinary way and gain more weight and more impact. I will then talk a little bit about what we have achieved as a network in terms of research, and I will conclude by making some pointers towards the future research agenda, possible future research agenda. So motherhood studies as an academic field was coined by Professor Andrea O'Reilly, who honored this event with her presence, and I'm so humbled and grateful. Thank you very much. So Professor O'Reilly points out that motherhood studies is an interdisciplinary field, and I quote, is committed to exploring the diversity of maternal experience across race, class, culture, ethnicity, sexuality, ability, age, and geographical location. I am deeply committed to the diversity of the maternal experience and to demonstrating the complexity and the diversity of maternal experience across the world. So I chose to work on migrant mothers that of course include mothers of color that Pragya was talking about at the opening session. And the question that I asked, the research question that I asked when when I first wrote that first proposal was, what languages do migrant mothers speak to their children? And in order to answer this question, I used the research skills available to me. I'm a literary scholar. I'm a feminist literary scholar. I could read text, so I turned to literature and read texts in many different languages, well, 3 languages that I am fluent in, Lithuanian, English, and French. And I looked at what representations of linguistic relationships between mothers and children where I could find in literature. And the answer is this. So some mothers speak their own mother tongue, others speak the language of the host country. Most actually speak some kind of a mixture of both languages or more, and some potentially speak neither. So, in my corpus of texts that is, well, transnational and is situated in many different cultural and socio-political settings, one text stood out, and it is a Lithuanian language text by a Lithuanian transnational author, Dalia Staponkutė, who lives and works in Greece, but writes and publishes in Lithuanian. And in her essay called The Silence of the Mothers, and you get the reference to the silence of the lambs, she portrays two migrant mothers. So there is one, and the essay is set in Cyprus, and one mother, one mother is doesn't speak Lithuanian or Greek. Well, it's the Greek part of Cyprus. Doesn't speak Lithuanian or Greek to her children. She speaks, and I quote, a smattering of English. She is portrayed in extremely negative terms. In fact, she is derided. And then there is another migrant mother, multilingual migrant mother, who speaks both her own mother tongue, which is Lithuanian, to her children, and a little bit of Greek in sort of social settings, but mostly she speaks Lithuanian. And she feels extremely unhappy, torn, and traumatized by the fact that her children are not fluent enough, or not as fluent as she would like them to be in Lithuanian. And that's how she describes her. This is the closing sentence of the essay. It says, as I observe the agonia, the battle of the death of my native language on my children's lips, I behold the image of my own vanishing. Reference to death. She speaks about language and passing on the language and referencing death. And I thought, well, what is this all about? So I looked further. I went back to motherhood studies instruments, and I thought, okay, let's look at what institution of motherhood is guiding this woman. What kind of an institution is making her think that she's going to die if her children are going to speak Lithuanian? So that enabled me to go and actually decipher the Lithuanian national motherhood script, which says in big red letters, you pass on Lithuanian to your children. And and that was that. So, I sort of made the connection in this sort of piece that I published on this literary piece. I made the connection that, well, because Lithuania has been occupied so many times, and the national Lithuanian script that was created at the beginning of the 20th century said, Lithuanian mothers pass on the Lithuanian language to their children, sort of persisted, and now affects migrant mothers more, because in Lithuania there is no danger to the Lithuanian language. Well, fingers crossed Putin doesn't come here, which we don't know, he may or may not. But at this moment in time, there is no danger. So mothers in Lithuania are fine, but those who live abroad are implicated and are hit by this institution. And of course, for some mothers, considering the sort of volatility, the vulnerability of Lithuania's geopolitical situation, it feels very real. Anyway, that was the end of the story. Fast forward to 2021. I'm now a member of the Mothernet. And it was January, I think, 2021. During the kickoff meeting, I end up in a group of scholars. I discovered that there is a group of scholars, of applied linguists who work at Vilnius University, who research the linguistic behavior of Lithuanian migrants across the world. And they actually interview Lithuanians all over the world on their on their experiences of passing on the Lithuanian language. And we start talking, and they tell me, you see, most of our respondents are actually women, they're actually mothers, and we have a small sample of people, of respondents, who report extremely negative emotions, who tell us that they failed to pass Lithuanian on to their children and are extremely unhappy about this. And I said, oh, listen, I know something about this. I want to I've done a study, I've done a literary study that I think it tells us a little bit about why that happens. Let's reproduce this study, let's repeat the study with your real interviews. And that's what we did. And what we discovered was that these women feel that they have failed at transmitting Lithuanian to their children. They are torn with guilt, and as a result, they feel that they have failed at motherhood. Now, this, applying the results of my literary research to a sample of real people has enabled us to show how harmful that institutionalized narrative really is. And it has been, we have been able to then argue that, will be able maybe in the future to argue that there are policy implications to this. Lithuania is not reproducing, we are not producing enough children for the country to reproduce itself. And it's one of the reasons that people are not having enough children, but the main reason is that people are emigrating. So, in order for the country to develop appropriate migration policies, which it is doing at the moment, they need to take into account that some people feel unable to feel Lithuanian because they feel they failed to pass their language on to their children. So this is one example of how Mothernet has enhanced my research. As Valerie said, another of my research interests is the highly educated migrant mothers' careers. How do migrant mothers develop their careers? So when I was living in Switzerland, I got together with a photographer, Marina Kavazza, and we thought we were a little bit stuck, really, career-wise at the time. And we thought, okay, let's do something about this. So we decided to photograph and interview migrant mothers in Geneva and ask them. So Marina asked them, okay, we want to know about your motherhood, your career, and about your migrant sort of story. How would you like to be portrayed? Like, tell us where you would like to be portrayed and how you would like to be portrayed. Anyway, and so she had those conversations with the women and she photographed them. And I met up with these women and I asked them, okay, so tell me about, you know, you're a mother, you're a professional, and you're also a migrant. How do you balance your three identities out? And I thought what I wanted to do was a sort of a photo story where I was going to let the migrant mothers' voices heard. I was going to just take the most interesting bits of their interviews and throw it out there and let the story tell itself. Ooh, I hit a hard wall. They told me many interesting things with a lot of ambivalence, a lot of pain, that they were absolutely not willing to go public with. So, you know, I respected their wish. We edited the bits that I had picked out, and I thought it tells the story so brilliant. It tells every sort of layer of inequality that they have to overcome in order to develop their careers and be mothers, and also potentially stay together with their partners. But they were not willing, well, many of them were not willing to tell all of that story publicly. So what we did, we edited, I respected their wishes, I let them edit the bits in whichever way they wanted, and as a result, we published a lovely photo story that, in my view, still tells a very interesting story about different inequalities, how racialized mothers from some parts of the world have fewer possibilities than others. How people who are white, European, and heterosexual have so many more opportunities as migrant mothers, and all the rest of it. And there is a little sort of introduction that that sets it in the context of to have it all. Because my generation of women and feminists had been told that we could have it all, which we found out was a lie. So we were very, and we were very legitimately upset, but that's okay. So when I first met, oh, I didn't finish that story. Sorry. Okay, so this was what I did pre-Mothernet. Fast forward again to 2022, maybe. I found myself in a lovely research cluster called Mothers and Work, working along a sociologist and visual, so screen studies researcher, Dr. Anne O'Brien, business studies scholar, and Marian Crowley Henry, a social work scientist, Professor Daiva Skučenė, and we got together thinking, okay, well, what could we do together? And I said to them, well, I said to myself maybe more than to them, but I also said to them, listen, I have all those interviews that I have the permission to quote anonymously. I have a story. I know what I want to say. You know, these women can't say it in their own voices. It's too dangerous for them. Their face comes in the book with them. They can't do that. But I could tell their story. I just can't figure out a way how to do this. Because I'm not a sociologist, I don't speak the language of social science journals. I don't know how it's done. And we have been working together, sort of, and I'm nearly done with that article, And fingers crossed, by the end of Mothernet, the article is at least going to be submitted. So this is what being, sort of interdisciplinary work can do has done to my research anyway. Okay, enough about me. Back to the network. So when I first met Professor Valerie Heffernan, she was putting together this special issue, which then turned into a book, on motherhood in the 21st century. And this is what she said in her introduction. Media representations of motherhood construct a moral landscape where certain choices and practices are deemed more appropriate than and even morally superior to others. Mothers whose experiences do not conform to the very narrow confines of these culturally sanctioned modes of motherhood, single mothers, migrant mothers, LGBTQI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, questioning mothers, adoptive mothers, and a whole host of other mothers often struggle to relate to their own experiences of mothering to the mainstream representations presented on television and in film, literature, and magazines. Now, I could say that this became a motto for Mothernet, really. With what we did with Mothernet, we set out to hear, to listen to at least, to the voices of all the mothers whose voices are never heard, or not as rarely. In fact, they are almost never heard. And this is where Professor Valerie Heffernan was visionary in some way, and that's how sort of she shaped the field of motherhood studies in Europe in a big way by sort of identifying that sort of hierarchy of maternal, some of them are good, and that's only a very small part, and all the others are just not worthy of even being heard of. So we said, okay, let's listen to what they have to say. So we focused on those maternal voices who tend to be silenced. And this is what we came up with. Now, this is only the research that has already been published, and you can go to Mothernet.eu, mothernet.eu, and you'll find all those articles open access, accessible. So far, we have heard the voices of the mothers who regret motherhood, who are violent and sometimes vitally violent towards their children, i.e. women who kill their children. And this is somewhere, I think, where motherhood studies is now grown enough, where we can really look at those mothers somehow with compassion and with understanding, where we can really move away from any kind of judgment and really try and figure out what is going on. So that's very important, and it's ongoing. And I know that, Andrea, you're working on that sort of thing as well, so that's very important. I'll be looking at what you do there as well. So mothers who are victims of sexual violence. Now this is, again, so important. Mothers with disabilities, migrant mothers and mothers who mother in several languages, mothers who mother other people's children, and teenage mothers. Okay, this is only a smallest fraction. So much more is in the pipeline. But going back to my initial point about motherhood studies in Europe today and the interdisciplinarity of them, this stuff that, it already is out, so it means that it was already in the pipeline somewhere when Mothernet started, or at least conceptually it was in the pipeline. And it's interdisciplinary, but it's mildly interdisciplinary. It's interdisciplinary in the sense that it applies concepts and notions that had been coined by, across disciplines. But, in terms of sort of genre, it still is literary studies or screen studies or visual studies. There's nothing wildly interdisciplinary in terms of methodology. But the stuff that is about to come out is getting really interesting in terms of interdisciplinarity. Because, you see, my role as a coordinator was very simple. I just had to use my networking skills within the network. And my job was to try and put people together who could potentially work well together. People from different disciplines. And so I did. I used my intuition. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But we had the luxury, or I had the luxury in my networking exercise to say to a literary scholar, I think you might want to go to that medic, and there might be something that you could be doing together. Or a social science worker go to a literary person and say, maybe we could do something together. So in terms of what I know, and I don't know everything in terms of what is planned, in terms of the research that is coming out of the MotherNet, but I know that there is a book where on non-motherhood, where disciplines are not necessarily impacting on one another, but the disciplines are sort of talking about the same issue along one another, which is very important, because in order to hear, in order for the society, in order for the research to have impact, one point has to be made in different ways, in different voices, in different disciplines, in different settings. It has to be repeated in the language of many different disciplines, okay? So doing research and publishing research where the same point is being made through literature, sociology, medicine, statistics, and whatever else is going to have more impact, is the research that will change the world. Well, potentially. Okay. But one other thing that is happening within the MotherNet is many research projects that are only now being developed. So, looking at what is happening within MotherNet and in European motherhood studies and potentially beyond, there are two major avenues of inquiry. So number one is the maternal body. In all the spectacular glory of what Julie Rogers called yesterday its post-human imaginings, so in the maternal body needs to be researched in its hardcore corporality and in its abstract medical, technological rebranding and transforming, okay? And this is where motherhood studies where medics have to work with philosophers, where literary studies have to work with nurses and midwives. And I have it's not that I have high hopes, I just am convinced that this is what needs to be done. This also includes something I just realized that in the long list of the voices that MotherNet scholars have already contributed to making heard, there is one group that is sorely missing, and I don't really understand how that happened, and it is the voice of single-sex or lesbian mothers. And in terms of, and also trans, well, I know that some people are working outside of Mothernet are working on this, but this really, when I looked at it as I was working on this keynote, I thought, oh, that really is a sort of a loud silence for some reason, and I'm not quite sure how that happened, so that needs to be corrected. Okay, and another sort of area of work, another field of work where motherhood studies needs to put a lot of effort is mother's work, money, and career. And this is something that we haven't done very well. So on the body, I think we've done quite well as a network, you know, because the medical team have been really very full on. But here, I would like to see us working with economists, with demographers, as we had, I was in a panel earlier today on demographic research, and what avenues of research can be explored when a demographer works together with a social scientist and with a cultural studies person. You know, I could just see how that is so important. We mothers have a different relationship to work than let me formulate this, than most people who function in the neoliberal capitalist society. Mothers think about work, money, and wealth in a different way, and that has not been articulated. And that can only be articulated if we have an economist, a financial specialist, potentially a lawyer, a sociologist, and a cultural person. We can only try and figure out the particularity of that relationship like that. Women's careers is, again, a very complicated issue, but they have to happen. Mothers also have ambitions. And how do we make sure that mothers have equal opportunities to honor their ambition? Now, I will finish a bit early, and I would like to say this. Two things, really. I don't know whether anyone here saw the Netflix film called Naiad. You did? Do you remember the name of the person who was portrayed? A film called Naiad. Has anyone seen a film? Sorry? Diane Naiad. So when Diane, I will start, maybe. So now, point number one is mothers deserve better in Europe and beyond. And our research has the power to do this if we do it right. And Zayed Nayad, when she did a solo crossing from Florida to Cuba, when she came out of the water, she said, "It may feel like a solitary sport, but it takes a team." That's what I would like to tell you. Research may feel as a very solitary sport, but it can only bring impactful results if we work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that overview of your research over the past few years, Eglė, and also those inspiring words at the end. I think it's given us all food for thought. I know I have some questions myself, but I'd like to open the floor first for questions.
Thank you so much. That was very inspiring, really. I have a very small comment and a small question. The comment is about what you were saying about mothers, money, and career, like the future project. It just brought to my mind, I noticed a trend on Instagram recently of budgeting mummies. That's how they are described. And they are basically influencers in terms of how to budget, and they write books and they self-publish themselves, which I find very interesting because there's no market really from a publishing point of view for them at the moment. And this is an international phenomenon, like it's not in one country in particular. And I've learned lots of tricks. I'm not a mom, but I'm budgeting. The question is, how can we overcome, when you were talking about interviewing mothers that are silenced, basically, how do we build trust with them? And I'm thinking especially of undocumented mothers. Like, how do we manage, you were talking about it can't be photographed, so how do we build trust? How do they know that they can trust us in a way? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I have to say that I have only interviewed extremely privileged mothers, but it became clear that, you know, people who were living in sort of highly patriarchal relationships or who had very few migrant rights, they did not feel... They were thinking very, very hard. I would ask them a question and I could hear them thinking in their heads, oh, you know, what can I say and what do I have to not say? You know, what will sort of get me in trouble? So I haven't really interviewed very vulnerable people. But I think that, first of all, you have to sort of, I don't think you could, it's a good idea to contact them directly. You need to go via people they already trust. So you need to find, I don't know, NGOs or whatever else, people who they already trust. So if you meet them through somebody they already trust, who have showed them support, who have helped them, they will see you as a friend. And then you have to start by what's the word now? By ensuring that nothing will ever come out of this, like nothing will become public. It will only stay, and you can even, it actually helps if you say, okay, this is what is going to happen with this interview. I will now put it there, I will protect it like this, so that they can imagine what will happen to them, to what they said, to their lives, you know, how they will be protected. And then, of course, it's how you frame the questions. It's yeah, and I wouldn't be a big expert on that, but I suppose letting them say what they feel like comfortable saying with the least intervention possible.
Andrea.
Hi there. Thank you again for your inspiring talk. I just maybe a more practical question with the MotherNet wrapping up. You know, how in terms of the questions you asked in your talk, you know, how do we move forward? How do we maintain these connections? Because that often happens after a conference. We come here and we're so energized and empowered, and then we all go back to our lives. And so, any thoughts moving forward? How to continue this passion, this research, these connections that we've we've made. And I understand the challenges of that. I ran a research center for 20 years, and we need time and money, and we lack both. So I'm just wondering how you envision moving this forward so it doesn't end in this room.
Well, so there is a conference in Boston this summer that I encourage you all to go to. And it's co-organized by people Andrea and Riley work with. So we do need, I think that we need to keep organizing conferences every 2 years or so and, follow one another's work. Email one another and stay in touch. Just after this conference, the papers you liked, email and say, listen, I liked your paper, why don't we think about doing something together? You will probably not do anything together now, but when you are putting your next research proposal, you will probably remember that person that you have already emailed and had a little exchange, So, yeah, that would be...
We don't want to spam it, but, just a way that we can stay in touch. I know there's issues of confidentiality and things, but just a way to keep in touch.
I think it might be a good idea, actually, if because of GDPR, we need to get your permission to be able to send you things, anything. But what we can do is follow up after the conference, email each of you, and ask for permission to keep in touch with you. And at least then we'll be able to keep you informed of other things that are going on. I will say MotherNet already has a couple of more follow-on grant applications planned. And all of the participants in MotherNet are very, very open to hearing from potential PhD students, potential postdoc fellows. So if any of you are coming to the end of a PhD program and looking for the next opportunity, please reach out. We're very interested in supervising postdoctoral research and looking for opportunities for postgraduate funding as well. So that would be a starting point. We will follow up about any possible opportunities for involvement in future grant applications.
So thank you, Eglė, very much. It was very interesting to listen and somehow have very much resonating thoughts from personal perspective and also from a research perspective. But in my previous research, which I also did many years ago, motherhood is, yes, connected with silence, with not hearing, not listening. But motherhood is also connected with power and control. And I just wonder how power you approach in your research, which can be misuse of power when mothers are very much controlling other women, for example, and their behaviors, and then also putting boundaries, and also reproducing very much patriarchal this all culture, because it awards them. So how do you approach this power and misuse of power in your network? How did you discuss this, and what research maybe possibilities you envision in the future?
Thank you very much. Well, Andrea O'Reilly has a term for that, which is patriarchal mothering or patriarchal motherhood. But I thought about this today or yesterday maybe, that term is very useful for people who understand what patriarchy is. But not everybody does. Not everybody knows all the constitutive parts. And all patriarchy also works in many different ways. So when I first moved from Lithuania to, well, I don't think in the UK I quite understood it. But anyway, when I became a mother and a wife in Switzerland, and specific brand of Swiss Western neoliberal kind of patriarchy started working against me, I didn't understand how it worked. It took me 2 years to figure out what it was doing to me, because I wasn't familiar with that particular brand of patriarchy. In my kind of patriarchy, where I come from, men, those either they are violent or they are not there. So the worst kind of a man in a post-Soviet bloc is the man who is not there. Financially, physically, sexually, in any way, it's not there. Or it's there to be a parasite. So I knew how to avoid those two dangers, okay? Ooh, what I was not told how to avoid is men who are refined and controlling, and the state that is refined and controlling and respects money. Not the power of mothers, but the power of money. So you're very right. We do need to, I mean, it's true that in the Mothernet we did not pay much attention to, oh no, maybe we did pay some attention, but we focused very much on the voices of mothers, trying to articulate their experience. That of course they work in, you know, mothers' experiences are always inflected by the kind of patriarchy that they are, or the kind of sort of structural inequalities that they are being subject to, or the power land map that they are, the power structure that they are navigating, right? So I'm sorry, that's not a very articulate answer. But I suppose we did deal with patriarchal motherhood by calling it this name. We should probably refine that vocabulary a little bit. I think that it probably needs attention. And in a space which is Europe, which is so diverse, patriarchy works in different ways, and we have to call it all out. Yeah, thanks.
Over here, there's another question. Thank you. Can I ask you just to give your name and your where you're coming from, or?
I'm Liz Evans, and I've come from Tasmania. I don't know if anyone's come further than me, but I'm actually from the UK originally. And I just want to follow on from that, because I really loved what you said at the end of your talk. Well, you said a lot of very, very interesting things, but this idea of collaborative work, which is in many ways not always what you find operating well within academia, which is a patriarchal institution. So I think there's something that we can kind of work on and work with here. And I'm thinking of the model of macho ecology, that sort of feminist collaborative spirit. People have been talking about Adrienne Rich, the cooperative spirit of second wave feminism, the co-support, the lift as you climb sort of approach. And if we can somehow really, truly translate the spirit and the energy into practical work, I think that would be amazing. And I would really love, you know, being at the moment all the way out in Australia, to somehow really stay in touch with this work in terms of my research and what I'm doing. It would be great. So yeah, I think that's really important, actually, to be really conscious of that and what academia can be, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So route number 1, motherhood.eu. Route number 2, come to conferences that are going to happen here and in Boston and stuff like that. What did I say? Motherhood. Oh, I'm sorry. Mothernet, sorry. The tiredness is catching up with me. Thank you very much. Mothernet.eu. But you're absolutely right. Academia is a patriarchal institution, and it's very hard to break down those structures. That said, we are doing our little grassroots support networks. We are doing we have a mentoring program. We have a mentoring program. We're trying to set up another mentoring program at Vilnius University. So, feminist initiatives persist here as well. They're little tiny things, and they do work. So, for example, the rector of Vilnius University, who opened the conference, he very recently went on a TV program. And I'm not sure, I don't know whether it was his intention, I doubt that. I think that the program, which is a lifestyle program, probed him very much on his parenting experiences and stuff like that. And I think he was pressurized into saying this a little bit, but he said, I am absolved of household responsibilities. And so I flagged it, I put it on Facebook and flagged it as a good example of leadership. You know, if people at the highest echelons of academia admit that there is gender inequality in their families, that's something to go by already. So the world is changing, you know. It doesn't always only go forward, often goes backwards a lot, but, you know.
Have we any more questions? I'm going to abuse my power as chair and jump in with my own question, if that's okay, while there's a moment of silence. Eglė, I think you spoke very compellingly, very convincingly, and very in detail about the inherent interdisciplinarity of motherhood studies as a discipline. You mentioned at the beginning, and I just would like to probe a little more about the inherent intersectionality of motherhood studies as a discipline. Can I ask you to say a little bit more about that, both in a general sense and also how it has how you brought it to bear on your own work?
Intersectionality. Yes, it is very important. I'm now trying to think which example to use. So this article that I'm working on at the moment on highly educated migrant mothers in Geneva, I am not the first person to point out that or my research is not the first to sort of demonstrate the fact that the more aspects pile up against a person, the harder it is for them to achieve a career. So, for example, if a person is a migrant, a mother, a colored person, coming from a non-democratic background, not having, having very seriously curtailed immigration rights, somebody whose background is in a profession that doesn't produce much money if it's a creative profession, that person has very little chance of achieving a career or even being able to look after themselves financially, let alone after their children. So this is, you know, it just, you really peel off those layers. It's not very easy to demonstrate in research, so, but this is something that's very important. Would you like me to go on, or?
So that's with reference to your own research. Can you perhaps tell us how you envisage this working in the future of motherhood studies, intersectionality?
Well, as I said, we first of all working with different sort of geographical, with different people coming from different countries. It is very important, for example, in this room, we have very few colored people. And somebody said during this conference, oh, you know, this Eastern European is very white. Is it really? Do we really look for where color and racialization lies? Do we actually always understand it? When we put our research teams together, do we think about race? Do we think about gender? Do we think about sexuality? Do we really think how to build really diverse teams? Because only by working in diverse teams are we going to pay attention to intersectionality and actually make it happen. Because with all the best will in the world, I'm a white, middle-class, heterosexual woman. I am privileged, and try as I may, my vision is still curtailed.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to think about our own positionality in all of this, so that's really inspiring. Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm sure we can continue our conversations over coffee. I would like to ask one thing. We have a photographer in the room. We would like to get a photo of everyone who's here at the conference first, and then we'd also like to get a photo of everyone who's involved in MotherNet. So if I can ask you to hold off for a moment, or please come and join us. Maybe the photographer might give us some direction as to where you want us to stand and how you want us to handle this. Can everyone please come forward?